Representative Joe Morelle walked into this hearing expecting a straight legal answer, but what he uncovered instead was a masterclass in avoidance that left the entire room stunned. From the very first exchange, you could feel something was off, not because the question was complicated, but because the person answering it knew exactly what the truth implied and wanted absolutely nothing to do with saying it out loud. And that's where this story begins, with a simple question about the limits of presidential pardons that somehow turned into a maze of dodges, detours, and carefully engineered confusion. Morelle starts calm, measured, almost disarmingly reasonable. Before he even touches the core issue, he lays out the clear reality facing Congress.
And received nearly 9,500 concerning statements or threats against members. Federal prosecutors have only secured 8 convictions so far, and the heightened threat environment demands an all-hands-on-deck approach. Will you commit to assigning an assistant U.S. attorney or a special assistant U.S. attorney in each of the 94 federal districts to, at least on a part-time basis, investigate and prosecute threats against members of Congress?
So thank you for bringing that up, and I take that very seriously. Not only what happened in Minnesota was horrible. I've spoken to Keith Ellison. I've spoken to Amy Klobuchar about that. It's horrible. We are involved in that. The FBI was involved. Our U.S. attorneys are involved. Many of these are district to district. So the way we're doing that is, I will tell you, my National Security Division is involved in all of those and assisting in those. We meet every single morning and we discuss that. But many of those, Minnesota, will be handled in the state in which it happened. Another one is
So may
Governor, I'm sorry if I can keep going. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I don't mean
Quickly,
to
though.
I filibuster. Governor Shapiro and what happened in Pennsylvania with Governor Shapiro. I've spoken to Governor Shapiro. We are working hand in hand, our U.S. attorney with the district attorney there, hand in hand, just like in Minnesota. I made sure our U.S. attorney and our district attorneys there were working hand in hand. Political party doesn't matter when something like this happens. And I also want to make sure all members of Congress are safe as well.
Okay, and I would reiterate, Chairman Stile and I think Chairman Stile and I agree that at least a part-time in each of the 94 districts would be appropriate. Let me change topics for just a moment. I'm
Really
sorry.
quick on that. Yes, we're doing that through our National Security Division, so I think that's already in the works, and I would be glad to meet with you in a secure facility to talk about that.
Very good, thank you. Continuing, in addition to my role here, the committee that I serve on as an authorizer oversees Capitol security as well as federal elections, so I'm closely following the aftermath of January 6th. Recently, several defendants who received presidential pardons related to that day are now arguing in court that the pardon covers crimes like, for instance, illegal firearm possession discovered in a search of an individual's home in California months after January 6th. What's your position on whether the pardons cover these separate offenses?
The pardon power rests with the president, not the Department of Justice, and some of that is pending litigation, and I cannot discuss pending litigation.
Well, I'm not asking you about who has the right to a pardon. I think as the Department of Justice in February wrote, the pardon is an act of grace which removes the punishment from a crime a person has committed. It further said, in its effect, the granting of a pardon is in no sense the overturning of a judgment of conviction. It is an executive action that mitigates or sets aside punishment. So as the chief law enforcement officer, what's your opinion, not the president's power of whether he can offer a pardon? That's pretty clear in the Constitution. But for crimes committed unrelated to January 6th, would you suggest that the pardons would cover activities or crimes potentially committed outside of that by the same person?
Well, I don't know if you're referring to Joe Biden pardoning his son after he said he would not pardon Hunter Biden, or the
No, I actually
commutation
referred
of
to
all
January
the
6th. I'm sorry.
all the sentences that the people that were on death row. I've met with those families.
No,
and all of those sentences were commuted. I'm not going to comment on pardons on either side of the aisle.
So, well, I'm not asking about either side. I'm asking, you're the chief law enforcement officer in the United States. You have a responsibility directly, be sworn oath to the Constitution, not the president. Want to know what your views are on the extent to which pardons cover potential crimes committed by individuals who have been pardoned but unrelated to January 6th.
Do you mean the ones that were done by the auto pen? I'm not going to
All
discuss
right.
anything that
Mr.
could be
Chairman,
or not be
I
pending litigation.
respectfully, Ms. DeLauro accused you of filibustering. I think that's the height of filibustering. This is a serious, serious topic. And for you to suggest that you don't have an opinion or to divert to other things that had nothing to do with January 6 pardons, I think is frankly demeaning to your responsibilities and your job. With that, I'll yield back.
Threats, violence, and a rising level of danger that federal prosecutors simply aren't keeping up with. Nearly 9,500 concerning statements or threats, only 8 convictions. He explains the urgency, the stakes, the need for resources. And for a moment, the conversation feels normal, serious, but grounded in facts. He asks for a commitment to assign prosecutors in every district to handle these cases. It's a straightforward request, and he gets the usual polished response: sympathy, concern, and a promise that everything is being handled behind the scenes. It's the kind of answer designed to sound responsible without actually confirming anything. But Morelle isn't here for the small talk. He pivots to the real reason he came: the aftermath of January 6th, where several defendants who received presidential pardons are now arguing in court that their pardons magically protect them from entirely new crimes committed months later. Crimes completely unrelated. Crimes that happened after the fact. Crimes that no legal expert, no judge, no constitutional scholar would ever argue fall under the umbrella of a previously issued pardon. It would be like getting a parking ticket wiped clean and then insisting the pardon also clears the bank robbery you committed 6 months later. It's absurd on its face, and yet defendants are trying it. And Morelle wants to know the Department of Justice's official stance that he asks, plainly, do these pardons cover unrelated crimes committed long after January 6? This is where everything shifts. Instead of answering, Pam Bondi launches into the kind of response that sounds like a legal answer but isn't one at all. She talks about who holds the pardon power, a fact no one is disputing. She mentions pending litigation, a classic shield to avoid commenting. She circles the topic without ever touching the substance. It's like watching someone walk around the outline of a door frame while refusing to open the door that's right in front of them. You can feel the tension rising because the question isn't tricky. It isn't partisan. It isn't hypothetical. It's about the structural limits of executive power, something any attorney general should be able to articulate without hesitation. Morelle senses the dodge immediately. So he tries again, and this time he brings receipts that he cites the Department of Justice's own February memo. Not an opinion piece, not a campaign statement. The DOJ's formal definition of a pardon, an act of grace that removes punishment for a crime a person has already committed. It doesn't overturn a conviction. It doesn't pre-authorize future misconduct. And it definitely does not create a permanent bubble of legal immunity for anything that person might do next. Morelle isn't stretching anything. He's quoting the DOJ's own language back to the person who leads it that he asks again, even more clearly. As the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States, what is your view on whether these pardons cover crimes that have nothing to do with January 6? If the answer were innocent, she would simply say it. If the law were on her side, she could cite it. If the truth supported the administration's narrative, she'd deliver it confidently. But she doesn't. Instead, she pivots, not to the Constitution, not to statutes, but straight into unrelated political territory. Suddenly, she's referencing other pardons, other people, other controversies, anything to shift the ground beneath the question. It's classic misdirection. When the facts are inconvenient, create noise. When the truth is too revealing, drown it in unrelated details. The dodge is so obvious that it becomes uncomfortable to watch. It's not just avoidance. It's avoidance wrapped in confusion, wrapped in misdirection. And the entire time, the core question remains untouched, sitting on the table like an alarm no one wants to hear. That's when Morelle calls her out directly. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't get theatrical. He simply points out the obvious. She is filibustering. Not by accident. Not because she misunderstood, but because answering the question truthfully would force her to acknowledge boundaries the administration doesn't want acknowledged. He reminds her of something she seems to have forgotten. She owes an oath to the Constitution, not to political convenience. Her job is to enforce the law, not rewrite it with silence. And the deeper problem becomes impossible to ignore. If an attorney general refuses to publicly acknowledge that a pardon does not cover future crimes, the implication becomes chilling. It opens the door, at least rhetorically, to a world where pardons can be used not as a remedy for past actions, but as a shield for future conduct. A world where the president could theoretically hand out protective badges to allies, telling them they can act as they please without legal consequence. It's the kind of concept that doesn't belong in a democracy. It doesn't belong in any functioning justice system. And yet, by refusing to say the words, she dances dangerously close to implying it. This isn't speculation. It's not a theory. It's the obvious conclusion when someone in her position avoids a question so simple that even first-year law students know the answer. The pardon covers what happened before, not what happens after. This isn't partisan. It's basic constitutional law. But Bondi's refusal to confirm it reveals how politically fragile that truth has become for the administration. She can't say it because saying it undermines the narrative they want to project about the individuals involved. If she acknowledges the limits of these pardons, she implicitly acknowledges that the legal system still has authority over people the administration has gone out of its way to protect. And that contradiction is exactly what she's running from. What makes this moment so important isn't the back and forth. It's what the silence represents. When the nation's top legal officer will not say the most fundamental legal reality about pardons, it's not neutrality. It's a warning. A warning about the pressure being placed on the Justice Department. A warning about how politicized the simplest legal principles have become. A warning about what happens when truth becomes the enemy of political strategy. That Morelle's frustration isn't personal. It's institutional. He sees the danger of normalizing this kind of evasiveness. Because once it becomes acceptable for an attorney general to dodge basic legal questions, accountability evaporates. Transparency collapses. And the public is left with officials who speak in circles while justice becomes a matter of interpretation instead of law. That he pushes again, not because he expects a sudden moment of honesty, but because the act of pushing exposes the problem. Every dodge, every detour, every unrelated mention builds the case he is silently making. This isn't someone unwilling to answer. This is someone afraid to answer. And that fear reveals the truth as clearly as any admission would be. Why the end? The takeaway is undeniable. Morelle asked a legal question grounded in fact, precedent, and common sense. A question any attorney general should answer without hesitation. A question about the limits of power and the boundaries of justice. And Bondi refused to answer it. Not because she didn't know, but because saying the truth would expose something the administration doesn't want exposed. Her silence becomes the answer. Her avoidance becomes the admission. And her filibuster becomes the story. Because in a functioning democracy, the law can't bend itself around political convenience. And when someone in her position tries to dodge the simplest principles, it's not a matter of confusion. It's a matter of choice. That a pardon is not a blanket pass. That a pardon does not erase future crimes. And a pardon tied to an attack on the government cannot be stretched into endless immunity. Republic. Joe Morelle didn't expose her with trap questions or clever tricks. He exposed her with the simplest test of all. Tell the truth. She didn't. And that silence tells the entire story. And if you found this breakdown insightful and want more deep dives into the moments others try to gloss over, make sure you hit that subscribe button, tap the like button, and turn on notifications. There's a lot more happening behind these hearings than most people realize, and I'll be here to break it all down for you.